Today, we're going to be talking about how you can take your research, your published research, before and after publication and turn it into an article that people are going to want to read. Promote your research and go viral. So before we get going, let's just remind ourselves what we talked about in the first 3 sessions. In week 1, we talked about planning our research for publication. In week 2, we talked about writing our papers up for publication. Last week, we talked about peer review, planning and managing and understanding the peer review process. And so now our research has hopefully been accepted, or at least close to being accepted, in a leading international journal. And so we are going to now think about how we can maximize the number of people who read it. And if you're anything like me, when I was working full-time as a researcher, you'd be doing what our friend in the hammock is doing over on the top of the slide. Once I got a paper accepted for publication, I did absolutely nothing to make sure that other people would read it. And that, of course, is a big mistake. Promoting your research after it gets accepted, before it gets published, is obviously key, very important to ensuring that the maximum number of people actually read it. So one of the key messages from this presentation will be to not be like me when your papers get accepted. Actually do something to make sure that other people in your network and beyond learn about your research and want to cite and read your paper. We are going around, all of us, all the time, the academic publishing cycle. So quick reminder of that. You probably are thinking, I've got several ideas. I've got some funding applications in. I'm collecting data on a variety of projects. I'm thinking about my papers at different stages of the academic publishing cycle. It's not like we just wait for one paper to cycle around. We are, all of us, at different stages all of the time with different projects on the academic publishing cycle. So this kind of thing, the kinds of messages that we're going to talk about today, are relevant to you at any point in the cycle. You will have work right now that's ready for you to talk about. So in this session this evening, we will talk about 2 things. We're going to talk about impact, what it is, and how to measure it as an academic. And then we're also going to talk about how you can maximize your research impact, how you can make sure that the maximum number of people read and cite your papers. And as with all of these training courses, number 4 in our series, please go back on the IVPN student website, listen back to the previous recordings of the other 3, share them with friends, share them with colleagues, share them with anybody who you think would be interested. The point of all of this training is to help you be more effective as a writing and publishing academic. So impact, and how to measure it, and how to maximize your impact as a researcher. And as we talked about in our first session together all those weeks ago, way back 3 weeks ago, there are, of course, a number of different reasons why people want to get their work published. And these reasons change depending upon your career stage. You may want to get published to get funded. You may want to get your work published to get promoted, to get tenure. You may want to get published in order to get your master's or your PhD degree, or indeed, perhaps you have a completely pure motivation for publishing your research. You just want to develop research and the future of your own field. But keep in mind, of course, when you think about writing and publishing your own work for international journals, your motivations are very different to those of editors and peer reviewers. They are looking at very specific aspects of your paper to make sure that it is good enough for publication. You, of course, have different motivations to see your work in an international journal, it could be one of the reasons on this slide. So as we think about what happens to papers once they go into the publishing process, we also start to think about why it's important to boost our citations. Of course, as we've discussed already in this training course, it's not just sufficient to write papers so we can give them away to our family and friends as presents. It is important to write academic papers so that other people will read them and other people will cite them. Readership, as we talked about in the writing session the week before last, readers are key in academic publishing. They are the users of your academic work. And so think about your readers and your readership and your audience before you begin to write. You may remember from our second session, thinking about beginning to write a paper, it's very important to have in mind your audience, your message, and the structure of your writing before you begin. Message, audience, and structure before beginning to write a paper, because of course citations are a measure of article usage. They're a measure of readership, and they're also a measure of your academic impact. The number of people that read your papers translates directly into your citation rate, which translates directly into your H index, and so on. So like it or not, this is one of the main ways that academics around the world get assessed by their universities, by their governments, by funding agencies. So thinking about your articles and how you can make them more reader friendly, how you can enhance your impact is very, very important. And it begins, of course, with journal selection. As we talked about in our first session, planning your research for publication starts with a message. It then also follows up with an audience, thinking about where you're going to publish your work, which journal are you going to use? And then the structure of the writing, as we talked about in the second session, comes from your target journal choice. So do have a look at what we talked about in our first session, because maximizing your readership, maximizing the impact of your next paper depends in the first place on where you publish it, your target journal. Because if you publish a paper in a journal that nobody's going to read, then of course it's no use to anyone. And if you publish a paper in Nature, in Science, then of course by default more colleagues around the world are going to read it. So we do begin this whole process with journal selection, thinking about impact factor, thinking about journal reputation, thinking about reach within the field, and whether or not that journal is open access or not. Choices that researchers make when considering where to publish. So a very personal choice, maximizing your impact. What kinds of readers are you going for? How many readers do you want to get? What particular target audience do you have for your particular piece of work? It might be a research paper, it might be a review paper, it might be a clinical trial, it might be an article that you want to get read by a specific audience group within your research area. Targeted pharmacy case studies, for example, are going to be put in front of a different audience to a general pharmaco study that looks at like population level trends and population level changes, for example. So your journal selection is very important. And of course, publications and where we publish, where we put our research remains at the heart of impact for us as academic researchers. Everybody counts papers. Everybody counts impact factors. Everybody looks at R and H indices. Of course, institutions count citations and they look at circulation. But your research circulation might not translate to impact. And how many people are actually going to read and how many people are actually going to cite your work? Very important things to think about. In my field Lots of work gets published in regional journals, very specific within our research area. Less people might be interested in reading and citing it. And that's the case with many areas of research. The impact that our papers make, especially in medical and health science related subject areas, is far more than just citations. The impact that your research, that your publications make is, of course, going to be a lot more than just how many people read and cite your paper. And we also know that coverage, the use of these H indices, the use of impact factors is very discipline dependent. Working in the sciences, working in the STEM disciplines, there are simply more journals that we can use to publish our research. If you were working in linguistics, in humanities, in social sciences, there are less places where you can publish your papers. There just are less journals, and those journals have less percentage coverage in databases like Scopus. So looking at this purely from an impact factor, journal reputation point of view in terms of measuring our impact is often not the right approach for our research. So we need to look more broadly. We need to look at the wider topic of research impact when we are thinking about promoting our research overall. Of course, citations are a way of measuring the impact of an author, an article, or a publication by counting the number of times that author, that article, or that publication has been cited in other works. And we're all aware of this. We all look at how well our papers have performed. We all look at our own citation rates. And so you should be, in terms of promoting and managing the output from your publications, use citation analysis tools. You should be engaged with Web of Science. You should be engaged with the Scopus database. You should have an ORCID and a Google Scholar profile. If you don't, then put one together. They're very important, especially ORCID, a great way to promote your research, a great way to share your research quickly and easily with the community, a great way to be identified, a great way for other researchers to find you, and often a great way to quickly and easily submit your work to journals when it comes time to do that. So engage with the tools that researchers use and be aware of citation analysis. We ask ourselves the question, who's citing my work? Which professors, which research departments, which areas of the world are engaging with the work that I publish? It's a very important part of managing your impact. Imagine if you have to go to a job interview or write a grant application. If you have this kind of data available to talk about, then you're going to be in a much better position. If you can say 300 people cited my most recent paper and they were from X, Y, and Z regions, that's much more interesting than just knowing about the citation metrics of a particular study. Who cited the study? What's the most cited study in a particular subject? And how you, as a researcher, can determine the best journals in your field. Of course, in some research areas, regional journals, local journals, subject-specific journals are read by people that you're trying to target, as we talked about before. Depending upon the kind of research that you're doing, depending upon the kind of research that you want to publish, you would target that research more specifically to a different kind of journal. The best journals in your field will be targeted in a different way. So thinking about your message, thinking about your audience when it comes time to start to write your paper up for publication, very, very, very important. And of course, these kinds of data, knowing about your impact, knowing about the difference that your next piece of research makes to everybody, socioeconomic impact, the difference that your research makes, not just in terms of citations, but in terms of usage, particularly important in your field, in pharmacology, in pharmacy, is very important. And you can use these kinds of data to justify appointments and requests for funding. Imagine how great it would be the next time you have to go to a job interview and you have this kind of data available to talk about. Quickly though, citation indices track references. In the bibliographies of published papers, they provide a way for us to search and for us to analyze the literature. And they also enable users to gather data on the impact of journals, as well as assessing whether or not particular areas of research activity and publications are worth engaging with. When you make decisions about where to spend your research money, where to spend your time, where to spend your energy, which knowledge gaps to look at, where to work, where to focus your research, you will obviously also be interested in which areas in your field are receiving the highest citations at the moment. So be aware of these kinds of citation indices, and of course, be aware of journal impact factors. This is calculated in the following way, and we're all aware of this. We all know that particular journals have higher impact factors than others, but it's calculated on a retrospective 2-year cycle, where S is the number of articles published in a journal over the last 2 years, and R is the number of citations in a subsequent year in all publications that indicate the journal from those 2 previous years. So keep an eye on Clarivate Analytics, because that's the database that releases journal impact factors. As we talked about in our first session way back 3 weeks ago, a journal with an impact factor has therefore got an impact factor released by Clarivate Analytics. If the journal says it's got an impact factor, but that impact factor is not in the Clarivate database, there's a problem, and probably the journal that you're looking at is a predatory publication. So one of the best ways to check if your journal really is legit is to look at whether it says it has an impact factor, and then go and check if that impact factor, if that journal is in the Clarivate database. This is how it's done in a more simple way. Here you can see that a journal's impact factor for a particular year is equal to the total number of times articles in that journal were cited during the previous 2 years, divided into the total number of citable articles in that journal over those 2 years. So the total number of articles is at the bottom and the total number of citations is at the top. So a higher impact factor simply means that the ratio between the number of papers and the number of citations is going to be larger. So Nature, for example, publishing lots of papers all of the time, those papers are all getting lots of citations. This is very important. Clarivate are about to release the most recent set of impact factor data for journals. You can see many journals on the bottom of the screen. Many of these journals will be increasing their impact factors in the most recent release of the Clarivate database. And of course, impact factors are increasing. They're becoming more and more and more and more important to us as researchers. So when you make your journal selection, when you discuss which journals you're going to be using for your next research publication, think about both the reach, the readership, the reputation, and the accessibility of the journal that you are going to choose. And do have a listen back to our first session in which we talked about research planning. Lots of information in there about journal selection. Get in touch with me. I can provide you with lots more information about how to pick an effective journal for your next paper. Thinking now about your impact, hopefully we've started to convince you that impact in publishing is more than just your impact factor. That's your academic impact. How many times people cite you is just one part of the story. You're going to see a series of slides from a fantastic website that's called Fast Track Impact. Do have a look at Fast Track Impact if you're interested in learning more. But this is how we are thinking about impact of published work these days. It's half academic and half economic and societal benefits. Very true in your field, very true in health sciences, very true in pharmacy. You're going to make an academic impact. People are going to cite your papers, but perhaps more importantly, the impact of your research will be felt in the society and economic benefits of the work that you do. So broadly speaking, impact, the impact of your research is the good that you are doing in the world, not just your citations, not just your impact, but what the difference is that your research is making to the lives of ordinary people. In particular, that's important in pharmacy, in medical, in health sciences. So you might publish a paper, for example, that doesn't get many citations, but the information in that paper could be used in other clinical trials. It could be used in other pharmacological applications. It could make a big difference to the lives of ordinary people. But from our perspective as researchers, as we start to think about talking and planning and building on the work that we do, let's think about how we can do that during the project, on publication, and also on an ongoing basis. Don't do what I used to do. Sit back in the hammock, do nothing once the work was done. Think about how you can talk about your research, how you can promote your research, how you can make sure that the maximum number of people know about your research. Use those social media channels. Engage with people on LinkedIn. I know that you do this. IVPN student, fantastic on LinkedIn. Engage with people, share your work, talk about your research, build your network, build your following, make sure that people know what you're doing so that when your work gets published, more people will know about it and more people will cite it. Of course, channels vary depending on where you are in the world. Channels vary depending on your subject area, but be aware of them, know your channels and use them effectively. Many training courses are out there. We can provide additional support and training in order to help you with the use of social media in your research, because of course researchers are engaging with the public more than ever before, but most have no idea how they are benefiting the people they interact with, like me, sitting in my hammock, doing nothing when my papers were published. Researchers are increasingly expected to be able to articulate the value of their work with the public to justify funding and demonstrate the impact of their research. So do ask yourself why it's important to evaluate your engagement, how you can do this better, how you can communicate more effectively, evaluating the design of your engagement with the public and policymakers. This will make you more effective as a researcher. You'll make more difference to the lives of ordinary people. Attention, interest, desire, and action of your research. How many times has a paper that you've written been shared, mentioned, clicked, viewed, downloaded? Where's the press coverage? And where are the citations? Fantastic checklists for you from Kudos, ways that you can develop and manage the impact of your research. And here's a word cloud as we think about what difference we are making to the lives of ordinary people with our research, because it's a journey over time. And this is a great slide, a fantastic resource. Do make a screenshot. Do clip this out of the slide file that the team at IVPN Student will share with you after this event, because if you have this kind of plan, the next time you put together a grant application or the next time you have to talk about your research, you will make a huge difference, because thinking about your impacts, thinking about your activities, your outputs, your outcomes and impacts is a great way to think about the journey of your research from beginning to end. It's not just about the final publication. There's a whole research journey here that you can be thinking about as a researcher, as you design, represent, engage, think about early impact, and then reflect and sustain on your research as a body, as a set of research, not just one paper standing alone, but as a series of pieces of research. And it's so important to tell stories, make impact, tell people why your research is important. It's not just the publication. You are going to be communicating about your research with the public. Talking about stakeholder engagement, you could just write a paper on the molecular genetics of tobacco, but not that many people would read it. You could write a paper on the societal benefits, the impact, the difference that your research is making to a broader subset of the population, and more people, of course, will read it. So do have a think about this. Do have a think about how you can tell stories about your research. Often it's more interesting when giving presentations, when giving talks, when giving engagement activities about your research, to talk about the things that happen during the process rather than the dry nuts and bolts of the research itself, because people engage much more effectively with stories. And as you tell them as a researcher, you will reach more people. Let's wrap up this presentation though in the second part by just giving you some tips and tricks for maximizing your citations, for building your citations, for making sure that your research projects, your research publications achieve maximum impact. How can you do this? It begins with the writing of the paper itself. Tip number one, choosing your keywords carefully, making sure that your work is SEO, search engine optimized. You should have a list of keywords for each paper that you write. You can get these from the MESH online database in health sciences in your field. Have a look at previously published papers in your area. What kinds of keywords did they use? Because 5 to 8 keywords, absolutely crucial. Search engines use keywords. This means that other workers can find and cite your work. So effective keywords, very important. Use different words in your keywords to the title. Don't repeat words in the title and in the keywords section of your article submission, because those will be wasted keywords. So effective titles, as we talked about before, are short and simple. They identify the main issue. They talk about the subject. They're accurate, ambiguous, specific, and complete, and they do not contain infrequently used abbreviations. Get keywords in there, different keywords to the keywords that you use in your keyword section, and above all, attract people's attention, attract readers, because studies have shown that shorter academic article titles tend to be more highly cited. Here's some examples from recent highly cited papers. And these readers, these writers have used a punctuation trick to get their message across even more effectively. And that's the use of a colon in the title. Something specific, colon, something general, or something general, colon, something specific. These are highly cited medical science articles from 2019. So have a look at these, make your titles as short as possible, and make sure you get keywords into your title that are different from the keywords in the keywords section of your submission. Tip number 2, make sure you use the same name on all your papers. Lots of people change their names when they get married. They write papers like I used to do, using a variety of different variations of their name. G. Dyke, Gareth J. Dyke, Gareth Dyke, and so on. Be unique, but be consistent. There will be other authors with the same name. So get an ORCID researcher ID. Make sure that you are findable, but make sure that all of your work is tieable back to you. Make sure you do this. Use the same name on all your papers. As we've already discussed in this presentation, it's very important to disseminate and promote your research. It's a journey. After all, don't just be like me. Don't just sit back in your hammock after the work is published and do nothing. Consider the tips that we've discussed in this presentation. Your work, your research is a journey. So talk about it, blog about it, tweet about it, talk about it on LinkedIn, as many of you already do very effectively. This will help you to develop your engagement, build that unique network. Make sure people know about your research. They will engage with you. They will engage with your study. They will be happy to see when you put out your next publication. So dissemination and promotion is very important as well. As we've discussed already, you can do this most effectively by thinking about the stories that fit in around your papers, telling people about the stories whilst you were doing the research, telling people about stories that come from the data collection, engaging with people through storytelling and talking about your research as a journey over time, your inputs, your activities, your outputs, outcomes, and impacts. You've seen this slide before. I do encourage you all to have a look at Fast Track Impact. It's a great place for you to go to get more information about how and where you can access and you can get into the journey of a research paper. Tip number four, cite within reason your own previously published work to build up your body of citations. Of course, don't go overboard, because if you just cite your own work, you cite your own work to a large extent, that can of course be an issue. Don't recycle submissions. Show that your previous work forms a pattern, and this is how you become a leader in your field, citing and building on your own previously published work. So that's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is to publish in journals that are read by others in your field. This helps to build reach in your research, because journal selection, very important, but this also helps to ensure that your audience is engaged. Where are the key journals in your field? Which journals are key people, key researchers, key stakeholders, librarians, health science professionals? Where are they publishing? Where are they reading? This will help you to maximize your readership, publishing in journals read by others in your field. And tip number 6, of course, is to try to publish, if you can, in open access journals, because most academic authors support open access. This provides far higher reach to your readership, open research and open data. But of course, there are issues around cost and impact factor. Many open access journals are simply newer than many of the traditional journals, so their impact factors are lower. There's also that article processing charge, that cost associated with open access publishing. But if you can, if you want more people to have access to your research, it's a good idea to follow tip number 6 and try to publish in open access journals if you can. Open access literature is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. Your research is still covered by copyright law, but open access terms apply to allow sharing and reuse. And all major open access initiatives for scientific and scholarly literature insist, of course, on the importance of peer review. So there's no difference between a traditional journal, a subscription journal, and an open access journal in terms of how that research is processed for publication. It will all be peer reviewed. Very, very, very important. Don't forget that many journals these days are hybrid. They allow subscription publishing, but they also allow you to pay a fee to get that work published in an open access format, so-called hybrid journals, whereas there are also a number of gold open access journals that are fully open access, fee on acceptance, the article processing charge. If you have further questions about journal selection, do get in touch with us, because we are here to help. The first recording of this session covers the topic of journal selection. If you want, you can jump on over to the IVPN student website, access the previous recordings in this series, learn more about journal selection. Tip number 7 for boosting your citations is to write review papers. A great tip. This is a good career step, but a key insight from us is to write to editors beforehand. It's actually quite difficult to get review papers published if those review papers are unsolicited. Writing a paper, a review paper, and then communicating after the paper's written with a journal or submitting directly to a journal is not the most effective way to get a review paper published. Write in the first place before you begin to put the paper together to editors. Make sure they are interested in receiving that review paper, and structure your review paper around a debated issue or a question. Of course, great for your career, great for your citation rate. If you can get a review paper published, people like to cite them. It saves a lot of time, but don't just write them and submit them to journals. Contact a journal editor first, because most review papers are actually invited by journal editors. Tip number 8 for effective citation boosting is to submit articles to special issues. Are you in touch with colleagues? Are you in touch with senior colleagues' conferences? These are going to be where key questions are going to be put together. So you can, of course, as well, propose special issues to journals. Talk to editors. Ask about upcoming issues. Special issues in your subject area, of course, are highly cited. They can be one-stop shops for people to learn about the state of the art in a particular field. So that's tip number 8. Submit your work to special issues. And tip number 9, of course, is to be collaborative. Work with others, communicate with other researchers, because collaborating is the key to a successful career. It will lead to more publications. It will lead to more opportunities. It will help you to build your personal network and enhance your impact. And it will also internationalize your research as you put your research out there, as people are going to have the chance to read more of your research. It's very important to collaborate. I would say one of the most important things to do to build your impact: collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And of course, if you can, higher impact factor journals are going to garner more citations. Target your papers. Go for rank and impact, aiming high. In our publication planning session, way back at the start of this course, we talked about how to do that. The rules for journal selection: aiming high, choosing appropriately, and learning to sell and manage your submissions to those international journals, while at the same time managing rejection. Of course, you're going to get rejected if you submit your papers to high impact factor journals. It's going to be the case that not everything you submit to Nature is going to get published in Nature. So dealing and managing with rejection is also a key career step, and it will help you to maximize your impact. So be aware of how you can check the impact factor of a journal on a journal website, on the Clarivate Analytics website, and identify those potential predators. Tip number 11, to be effective with your publications, maximize your citation rate, is to include a comprehensive reference list. Show your readers that you're on top of the field. Show your readers that you are an expert in your field. Show your readers that you are fairly citing across all of the available literature in your subject area. Cite, but don't overcite. Use your own work. Cite potentially in a range of languages. Travel back in time to cite early work in your field as well as the most recent literature, and check those other papers in your field. Actually read and cite correctly other pieces of work in your field, because propagating incorrect citations in the literature can be an issue. And tip number 12, returning to the topic at the beginning of this series of tips, be smart with your title. Effective English is short sentences, limited words, less is more. Ask an interesting question with your title and use different words to your keyword section. Allure, entice, get people interested in reading your work. Bring them into your study, because don't forget that your readers are key in academic publishing. Citations are a measure of use. They're a measure of readers, and they're also a measure of your academic impact, although your impact as a researcher is more than just your citations. It's the difference that your research is making to the lives of ordinary people around the world. Your academic impact, your societal impact, thinking about the key way that you are going to be assessed. So in our training with the IVPN, we are here to help. We are here to help you prepare. Things to think about before you put pen to paper. Have a listen back to the first training session in this series to learn more about preparing to write. We're here to help you sell yourself to journals, how to capture an editor's attention. In the structure of your writing, as we talked about in the second session, you need a structure. You need that, or you and your editor will be lost in the mix. And you should be effective with your writing. Of course, there are simple rules that make a huge difference when putting your articles together. So do go back and listen to the other training sessions in this series: planning your paper, effectively writing your paper, targeting it to a journal, and managing the peer review process. Because today, this evening, we have talked about impact and how to measure it. We've talked about how you can maximize your impact. I've given you a number of tips that you can apply in your own work to maximize your impact. In this training, over the course of our time together, over the course of the last few weeks, the whole point of what we've been doing with IVPN Student is to help you all be more effective as writing and publishing academics. I would like to thank very much the moderators for this session this evening, as well as my wonderful colleagues at AJE and at EdAnts. If you would like some help with your articles, if you would like us to help you write your article, if you would like us to help you with the statistical analysis or make figures or help you in any way with your next paper, do get in touch with me. Do reach out to me on WhatsApp. You have my number there on the screen. We've also prepared a link for you so that you can have a look at the amazing AJE digital editing tool. My name's Gareth Dyke. I would like to thank everybody listening to this presentation very much for their time, for joining us over the last few weeks for this training session. And with that, I'll pass the baton back to Kareem in case there are any questions from our session this evening. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for your time. Kareem.